Hello, I am so happy to be talking to an obliger today. I am talking to Ron Lieber. Ron Lieber is an award-winning journalist. He writes the Your Money column for the New York Times. He's also written for the Wall Street Journal. And in addition, he has written several New York Times best-selling books. Most recently, he wrote The Opposite of Spoiled, Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money. And just recently, he has a new book that just hit the shelves that had a huge amount of buzz and splash around it, which is The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. And Ron, I'm really, really excited to talk to you because you're enormously productive. You're enormously prolific. You've clearly figured out how to harness the strength of the obliger tendency and also figured out how to work around any of the limits or weaknesses of the obliger tendency. So I'd love to talk to you about kind of how you think about that. So first of all, I mean, obliger, the definition of obliger is that you readily meet outer expectations, but you struggle to meet inner expectations. How have you set up your life to take advantage, how to achieve your aims, given that sort of perspective of the obliger tendency, which, by the way, is the biggest tendency?
Sure. So I guess it starts with the fact that I chose an area of focus in journalism that is almost sort of custom built for an obliger, right? What I do is service journalism, and back when you and I were starting our writing careers, that was considered a sort of, not a dirty word, but it was kind of like a second tier sort of thing, right? Like you were the one who did the useful stuff in the back of the magazine or, on the feature pages of the newspaper. But I didn't see it that way. I thought there was great honor in doing journalism that was of direct service to people, that they would want to rip out and put to work in their lives that would make them different and better, right? And so I set out to work literally, attempting to oblige those readers and the very specific needs that as time went on, became easier and easier for them to come to me directly and tell me exactly what they wanted, whether it's through email or through comments or now through social media. So like you, I have sort of a direct channel into people's brains, and I can do exactly what they say they want.
And so how do you think about then your own inner expectations? So you've set up your work life so you feel like you're surrounded by outer expectations, people who want something from you and expect something from you. You're the authority to whom they turn. And then how about your own inner expectations for yourself?
I don't have to answer to myself as often as you may think, because I work in such an incredibly deadline-driven culture, right? So if it is a newspaper story or a newspaper column, I don't really get to decide when that's done, right? I'm a columnist. The column runs on the weekend. It's got to be done by Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. So that's. I've put myself in a situation where I don't have to kind of set my own rules. The same thing is true with book deadlines, as you know, or if there's a talk, a speech to give, right? You know exactly when you need to show up. And so the amount of work I'm generating kind of my own volition or on my own initiative is actually kind of small, right? I mean, I make the decision to book the speech, I make the decision to write the book, but after that, it's all more or less on somebody else's timeline. And I kind of like it that way.
Sure, absolutely. And it's interesting because rebels will like write a book and then sell it because they don't want to have the feeling an editor and an agent and a book publisher is counting on me, which for you is very helpful. Now, what about inner expectations for yourself? Things where really nobody cares except for you. There is no editor, there is no audience expecting something. It's just you care and others maybe don't care.
I mean, I guess I find it most easier or I have the highest odds of success in those instances when I set up accountability mechanisms with outsiders who are kind of watching over me. I guess the most recent example of that is that I have sort of publicly declared my intention to run the Chicago Marathon in October.
Wow.
And, it's something that I'm pretty sure I can do. I've run a couple half marathons. I'm in decent shape. I don't have any particular health issues, but I am turning 50 this year. And so, it's not a small task. And so I've set all of these, markers, guideposts. I've created all these tools for myself to make sure that there are people kind of looking in on me, so I am not in it alone.
Well, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that many obligers might want to know a little bit more about how you did that, because I think that's exactly right. If you have an inner expectation, like I want to run the marathon by the time I'm 50, it's like, how do you create the architecture of outer accountability around that? So what are some of the kind of the most innovative or most useful things that you did to create that outer accountability?
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively boilerplate stuff. But let me start with the thing that's most probably kind of emotionally resonant and in that way most useful for me. So my father died a couple months ago after 5 or 6 years of an ALS diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I know I want to do is get out there and do it, because, you know, he was a long way from being able to do anything like that himself.
Right.
And he was a runner once upon a time, but, you know, hadn't been for a long time, and was, you know, was physically disabled for basically the entire course of the disease. And so one of the things I plan to do, you know how marathoners write their names on their shirt so that everybody can shout at them, like, "Go Ron"? I'm going to put my dad's name. Right. So people are just going to shout, "Go Fred" at me like 1,000 times over the course of, you know, the first 20 miles. And if that doesn't, you know, kind of get me going, I don't know what will. That said, you know, I'm doing the whole belts and suspenders thing. Right. So I'm running with my friend, Matt. His wife is in the middle of breast cancer treatment right now. And we're running for a team, Immerman Angels in Chicago, that's actually run by my sister. It's a cancer organization that pairs the newly diagnosed up with people who are exactly like them, who've already come out the other end with the exact same cancer. So, you know, if you have premenopausal breast cancer and you're unmarried and you're worried about your fertility, Immerman Angels will hook you up with somebody just like that, who's already out the other side, having survived it. Right. And the same thing if you're 79 and have prostate cancer, right? And so I'm on the hook for, you know, a whole bunch of money, and to my sister, who did the marathon herself 2 years ago, right? So I've got all this stuff going on where, you know, I'm going to disappoint a lot of people, but mostly myself if I don't actually get it done.
But I think that sometimes people think like, well, shouldn't it be enough that I would disappoint myself? And there's something kind of wrong about trying to rely on outer accountability. And I'm like, it's just some people do better with outer accountability. And as you say, there's many, I mean, in a way, these are like beautiful ways to sort of dedicate it to your family, to your father's memory. What's wrong with that? If this is part of the belt and suspenders that keeps you on track to achieve your aim for yourself, that's great. And I do think sometimes people are like, oh, I have to take a class, but actually I'm always astonished and impressed by how ingenious and imaginative obligers can be about the ways that they create outer accountability for themselves once they realize that that's what they need. I think the problem is thinking like, I shouldn't need it, so I won't get it. I should be able to do it without it, instead of being like, I need it. I do better without our accountability. So let me just find myself a way to get it. And those are terrific ways to get it.
I mean, I wish I felt as comfortable in my own obliger skin as you want me to be. But I can't help but say to myself, God, wouldn't it be better if you could just do this on your own, right? Because you told yourself to. And I think maybe I could. Like I ran the half marathons that way. There was nobody looking over my shoulder. I just decided that it was something that I wanted to challenge myself with. And so maybe I could do it on my own, but I sort of felt like I needed the belt and the suspenders more than I wanted it. But I'm glad to have it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the important thing is that you achieve your aim for yourself, and it sounds like you're definitely on your way to do that. Now, how about the other people in your family, with your spouse or your children? Do you see their tendencies? Does that come up in any way that you can put your finger on?
Yeah, so my wife is an investigative reporter. Can you guess which of the four tendencies she has?
Right? Okay.
Yeah, so
she's a questioner, probably.
It's unending questions.
Yes.
And not just of me. And you know, that served her well professionally, and obviously I find it attractive personally. I have a lot of questions too, but I'm more of an obliger, I think, than she is. and it's interesting to think about the emerging personalities in my daughter. So I have one who's 15 and one who's 5. The 5 is very much turning into a questioner. She's stubborn, and I was sort of hoping that one of my kids would turn out to be a rebel. The 15-year-old is reasonably compliant, right, in terms of following rules and behaving herself in school. But I am trying to kind of stoke the renegade in her, and I feel like she has it in her. She's a talker. She is. She calls people out. She lacks patience for.
But people of all the tendencies can do that. It has to do with how you meet expectations. So don't draw the other associations into it, because there's a lot of obligers who call people out, and they do it from the obliger place. So
I guess, Gretchen, I guess I would rather that she did not end up being an obliger. Do I have the ability to actually affect that?
No, I think that these are hardwired. I think that they're part of what you bring into the world. But also, I think like everybody can achieve their aims for themselves. So I wouldn't say it's better or worse to be one or the other. It's more like, do you know yourself and make the most of what you have? I would say. But it's interesting because the rebels pair up most productively with obligers. And so it's interesting that, and part of that is because the rebel tendency is attractive to obligers. So it's interesting that you sort of seek that in a child, because there is this affinity often between rebels and obligers. So that's interesting. Now, what do you think that other tendencies get wrong about obligers? Like, where do you feel like they take advantage of obligers? Because you can take advantage if they're the ones that are the most likely to help out, or maybe they're not helpful when you're like, I want accountability, and maybe they're like, well, I don't see why you need it, so I don't want to be bothered. Like, what do you wish other people did better?
I've never had trouble asking for assistance in terms of accountability measures. It's interesting, this idea of being taken advantage of. I guess I tend not to see it that way because I'm an obliger, right? I don't want to see the worst in people, but I do feel like I get way more than average, way more than the average number of random emails from friends and friends of friends and random strangers who just want me to help with this thing or do that thing. Part of it is I sort of spoon out advice in the newspaper for a living. So people think that I can do it one-on-one. And I appear at least to be a person who knows a fair bit about a lot of things. And so I guess that should be expected. But I also think that, I have developed, cultivated, a repetation for myself as a mensch, right? As
that's true. I can testify. That's true.
As somebody who will say yes, right? As somebody who will respond, and so do people take advantage of that, or is it a form of tribute when they ask, right? Is it something that I should take as a compliment? I guess that's how I choose to see it, because I'm just not the kind of person who imagines someone trying to take advantage of me.
Well, I think you put your finger on something extremely important, which is, this is why obligers are the rock of the world. This is why they are the people who are most often turned to, because they are the people who are most inclined to go the extra mile or to help out. And but what happens, and it's great that you haven't experienced this, is I think for some obligers, they're like, okay, because I'm the one that's kind of the good sport. I'm the one that when somebody has to work late, they ask me first, or when they need somebody else to staff that project. I'm on 11 projects, my coworker's on 4, because I'm the one that's good at my job, meets my deadlines, and is willing to help out when somebody needs it. And at a certain point, it can become overwhelming. It can feel unfair. Sometimes obligers feel ignored or kind of exploited. So it sounds like you don't feel that way. So maybe you've never experienced obliger rebellion, which is when obligers sometimes kind of explode under the weight of expectations. Have you ever had that experience? It's kind of a sudden, almost surprising refusal to meet expectations? Maybe not. You sound like maybe not.
Not quite. I mean, I think I've gotten a little bit better in my advancing age at saying no. I never feel good about it, ever.
And how do you say no when you decide you should say no?
I usually, bracket it with like a bunch of, I was about to say excuses, but I'm not going to disparage myself by using that word. Reasons, right?
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel like I'm saying no because I don't think they or their project or something else is not important. I just want them to understand, where my priorities may be at any given moment. And right now, in particular, in our household, we're coming off of several years of just entirely too much extracurricular activity. My wife and I have both written books in the last 5 years. We've got a kid who was 0 to 5 during that span. We've got a teenager who changed schools, with all of the crazy applications. And then there was a pandemic kind of heaped on top of this. And
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's time to, and a father who slowly withered away over that time, right? So we need to focus a little bit more internally. And so I'll often, sort of lean on that. And people, you trot out the young child or the dead dad excuse, and people are generally willing to leave you be.
Well, I think another way to sort of characterize that is to think to yourself, because I think sometimes it's hard for obligers to even acknowledge that they want to say no, or it's, and to say, well, sometimes to say yes to someone, I have to say no to someone else. So I've decided I need to say yes to my family and be home for dinner every night. And that means I have to say no to my team when they want me to work late. Because sometimes it's like in the moment, it feels like, oh, I want to say yes, but it's like, but no matter what, you're stuck. There's a no for somebody. And it's like, okay, I have to, my family, we've got a lot going on. It's all hands on deck. I can't help you out with this. I have to say no to you so I can say yes to someone else. And so, and I think you're right. People get it, that it's like, you can't do everything all the time. But I think sometimes obligers do feel they want to be the mensch. They want to be that, they want to help out. They know that they could do good work and help someone, and it can be hard. It can be hard to say no.
Yeah. I mean, I also want to be thoughtful about it too, because it's like, so the request shows up, and I there's a part of me that's trying to retrain my obliger brain to like reflexively say no to stuff that comes from strangers. But then more often than not, I sometimes stop and think, okay, hang on a second. What would Gretchen do? Right? Because is this a 60-second or less task?
Yes.
Right? Because if it is, I can just do it and feel good.
Yeah. The 1 minute rule.
Out. Yeah. It's the 1 minute rule, right?
Yeah.
And I will admit to having, bastardized the rule some. I will sometimes stretch it to 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Right. Is that okay? Or am I doing myself a disservice? No, is it no longer a Rubinesque rule if I've added minutes to it?
Well, as a lawyer, I would say there's a de minimis thing, but then there's also the decision fatigue of like, should I do it? Should I not do it? But you and I are both married to questioners. And I don't know if you ever channel your wife, because I will sometimes say, sometimes I will literally ask Jamie, should I do this? And he's always like, why would you do that? Why would you? Right? Because that's what they always say. Why would you do that? But sometimes I'm just like, because as an upholder, I also have a strong tendency to like, if I can just do this, just do this. And you have to remember, what are the reasons to do it? Because there's often good reasons to do it. To be a helpful person in the world is a very good reason. If you're like, in 10 minutes, I can answer an important question for you, I'm just going to do that because that's a nice thing to do. You're a stranger, but I have important information that might be meaningful to you. I'll take 10 minutes and write that email. But at a certain point, you have to be like, why would I do that? And it's different for different things. And I think there is a decision fatigue that comes from constantly weighing that. But there's value too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think, what annoys you about the other tendencies? I mean, like one thing I often hear from obligers is, look, if somebody asks me to help them out, if I can, I will. And then they're very puzzled and often really do not understand why upholders, questioners, and rebels are like, yeah, it's not my job to do those dirty dishes in the office sink. So yeah, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, who are you people? Like, do you ever have this feeling about the other tendencies where they baffle you?
Yeah. So I don't have any problem with anyone knowing who they are and going to do their thing. But I don't like it when people refuse to communicate.
So
I don't like it when
explain.
When I don't like it when they're impolite, and I don't like it when they don't explain themselves.
So give me an example of what you mean.
Well,
like
people who don't reply to text messages or emails, particularly if I know them, right? That just drives me nuts, right? That could be a form of rebellion. It could be a form of upholding a commitment to myself, or some other commitment, that I'm going to do this thing or be this way.
Yeah.
And you and your, pesky question or your third follow-up because I've ignored you the first 2 times, it doesn't fit with me. It doesn't fit with my, doesn't fit with my vibe, right?
Yeah.
And so, in the very least, can you just explain yourself politely, right? So I have a friend who's got this out of office email right now that says, I've decided not to do email anymore. Please excuse this unconventional approach, period. That's it. It's like, if you've got her cell phone
drop
number,
mic,
then if you got her cell phone number, you can get to her. If you can figure out who her, agent or manager or whatever is, like, you can do that.
But is she
but that's it.
Is she doing that thing that people do when they send the out of message, but they're actually checking it and you get an email from them 5 minutes and it's all just a ruse so that they get rid of the expectation that they're reading their email? Does she answer her email?
Only if something very important is kind of like happening in the moment.
Then yes, she does.
If there are logistics happening on something that she already committed to via a different forum, right? Then maybe the email will happen. And it's not how I would want to move through the world, and I don't particularly like being the recipient of it. But I totally respect what she's trying to do, and she explained herself, and she wasn't rude.
Oh, I see. So you're saying, all right, okay, now I don't expect an answer from you because you're just not doing this. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So don't ghost me.
I see.
Right. Just or ghost me to tell me why you're ghosting me.
First. Right. Don't just leave an empty. Yeah. And do you feel like? Do you feel that there are times where people impose on you because they know that you are a mensch? I mean, you said that you do feel like you get more requests than the average person. Do you ever feel resentful, or do you ever feel like, I wish you'd just take this somewhere else, or there's a more logical person for you to ask? I don't understand why you're coming to me with this. You get it. You see.
No, I mean, there's a couple of things going on there. One is that I don't have so much knowledge and so much power and connections that I'm like that in demand where
it's unmanageable.
Where it ever feels, totally overwhelming. And then there's also the fact that I really am where I am, and I am who I am because of hundreds of people who threw the rope back for me, and I never let myself forget that. Right. So am I an obliger out of duty, or am I an obliger because it was an innate tendency? I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me, but it does feel like my whole life, is sort of a process of repaying debts of gratitude to the people who came before me, who allowed me to dig out and reach up in various ways. And
think of, I know from you describing how it came to be that you wrote the book, your earlier books, I didn't know you when you were writing them, but The Opposite of Spoiled and The Price You Pay for College, I did know you. And I remember you saying, this is because this is what is on people's minds. This is what is keeping them up at night. These are their concerns. I'm hearing it over and over again. So in a way, your responsiveness to that question from your readers is really what kind of fired your intellectual, ambitions, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true to a great degree. But the ambition is also fired by, sort of young Ron remembering what it was like not to have enough money for college and trying to figure out what to do about that and what was worth stretching for. And, the opposite of spoiled was born in part of young parent Ron being just like laid flat by his 3-year-old who wanted to know why she didn't have a summer house. Right. And I was like, God, what did we do wrong that made her think that, she was entitled to a summer house? But that wasn't actually what was going on at all. She had just become aware somehow of the fact that summer houses were like a thing that some people had. She didn't have one. She said she wasn't ever going to get one. Right. And she wanted to know why that was, not because she was entitled, but because it's a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 23-year-old and an 83-year-old's job to figure out how the world works, right? And who has more and who has less and how that came to pass and whether it's fair, right? And so I felt like I wasn't, doing my job on the most micro level if I didn't have a good answer for this macro question that clearly a lot of other people were trying to answer too. So it was very much about me. But
well, they say research is research.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ron, it's so wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much. This is fascinating to hear your reflections on the obliger tendency, the biggest tendency for both men and women. So people are obligers, or they've been obligers in their life. So it's great to hear your point of view.
Thank you for having me. I felt obliged to say yes.
I know. Well, thank you very much. I very, very much appreciate it.